I left my lazy husband for an alpha male. I didn't know he was worth 600 million. I called him a loser because he packed my lunch. I found out the truth on the news. The divorce didn't start with a scream. It didn't start with a slammed door or a discovery of a lipstick stain on a collar. It started much more quietly than that. It started with a lunch. My name is Elena Vance. I am 32 years old, and at the time of this story, I was a senior account manager at Apex Marketing, one of the most aggressive firms in San Francisco. I am the kind of woman who schedules her coffee breaks. I wear tailored blazers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I have sharp features, expensive taste, and a terrifyingly clear vision of what success looks like. To me, success was noise. It was movement. It was stress. If you weren't stressed, you weren't working. If you weren't exhausted, you weren't trying. But that ambition made me blind. It made me look at a diamond and see a rock. I remember the day vividly. It was a Tuesday in November. A gray, drizzly Tuesday that soaked the city in a cold mist. I was sitting in the break room at the office. The break room was a soulless place with flickering fluorescent lights and a carpet that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn and despair. Around me, my colleagues were eating the food of the desperate. Sad, limp sandwiches from the vending machine. Reheated pasta that smelled like garlic and regret. Energy drinks cracked open with a sharp hiss. And then, there was me. I sat at the table and unzipped my insulated lunch bag. It wasn't just a bag. It was a hand-stitched leather carrier that my husband, David Thorne, had bought for me because he said plastic ruined the aesthetic. David is 35 years old. He has messy brown hair that he constantly runs his hands through, quiet gray eyes, and he usually spends his days wearing soft t-shirts and sweatpants. To the outside world, and to me, he looked like a man who had given up. He looked soft. He looked safe. I pulled out the bento box he made. It was beautiful. Honestly, looking back now, it belonged in a museum, not a break room table covered in coffee rings. It was a two-tiered lacquer box, smooth and cool to the touch. I opened the lid. Inside, perfectly arranged, was a fillet of grilled salmon with a honey miso glaze. It was still warm. Next to it were 3 pieces of tamagoyaki, Japanese rolled omelette, that were yellow and fluffy. There were cucumbers cut into the shape of little stars. There was a small container of ponzu sauce, sealed tight so it wouldn't spill. And, tucked into the side, was a handwritten note on thick cardstock. It read, "Good luck with the Q4 presentation, L. You're going to crush it. Love, D." I stared at the note. I stared at the stars cut out of cucumbers. I didn't feel loved. I didn't feel grateful. I felt suffocated. I felt annoyed. "Wow," a voice said from across the table. It was Mark Sterling. Mark is 34 years old, the VP of Sales, and the self-proclaimed golden boy of the office. He has slicked-back blonde hair, teeth that are unnaturally white, and he wears Italian suits that fit him like armor. He walks fast, talks loud, and smells like expensive cologne and aggression. Mark was the embodiment of everything I thought I wanted. Mark leaned over, looking at my lunch with a smirk. "Did he make that?" Mark asked. "Like, actually make it?" I sighed, pushing the box away from me. "Yes," I said, my voice dripping with exhaustion. "He made it this morning." "That must have taken, what? An hour?" Mark laughed, shaking his head as he sipped his black coffee. "2, I corrected. He was up at 5:30 a.m. marinating the salmon. I heard him in the kitchen while I was getting ready." Mark held eye contact with me. He lowered his voice, making the conversation feel intimate and conspiratorial. 2 hours, Mark repeated. On a Tuesday morning. He leaned in closer. Elena, ask yourself something. What kind of man has 2 hours to chop cucumbers into stars on a workday? The question hung in the air. It triggered every insecurity I had about my marriage. I don't know, I muttered, feeling a flush of embarrassment. I'll tell you what kind, Mark said. A man with no drive. A man with no ambition. A man who is happy being domestic. He said the word domestic like it was a slur. Like it was a disease that I needed to be careful not to catch. He's not domestic, I defended weakly, though my heart wasn't in it. He does consulting. He manages our portfolio. He stays busy. Consulting, Mark scoffed. Right. That's code for unemployed. You're a shark, Elena. You're a killer. You just closed the Verizon deal single-handedly. You need an alpha. You need someone who runs at your speed. Not a househusband who thinks making lunch is a career. I looked down at the beautiful salmon. Suddenly, it didn't look appetizing. It looked pathetic. It looked like the work of a man who had retired from life at 35. You're right, I whispered. I know I'm right, Mark said, winking. Dump the lunch, Elena. Come out with me tonight. Let's get a real dinner. Steaks. Martinis. Business talk. Real adult conversation. I stood up. I walked to the trash can. And I threw the bento box in. Unopened. That was the beginning of the end. I threw away his love because I thought it was weakness. I went home that night with Mark's voice echoing in my head. You need an alpha. Not a maid. I pulled into the driveway of our house. It was David's house, technically. He had bought it before we met, 4 years ago. It was a stunning mid-century modern home in the hills, with glass walls looking out over the valley. I knew David had money. When we first started dating, he told me he had sold his first tech startup, a company called Nexus. I never asked for the number. I thought it was tacky to talk numbers. But based on the house, and the fact that he never worried about bills, I assumed he had cleared maybe $10 million. $10 million is a lot. But in this city, 10 million just makes you comfortable. It doesn't make you a titan. And David didn't act like a titan. I walked into the house. The contrast between the cold, gray office and this home was jarring. The air here smelled like rosemary and fresh bread. The floors were gleaming. The lighting was warm and inviting. David was in the kitchen, wearing a gray apron over his t-shirt. He was stirring a pot of risotto. Hey, Elle, he said, turning around with a warm smile. How was work? Did you see the note in your lunch? I dropped my bag on the counter with a heavy thud. I didn't have time for lunch, I lied. I was busy closing deals. David's smile faltered for a second, but he recovered quickly. That's okay, he said. I made risotto. And I opened a bottle of that Pinot you like. He poured me a glass of wine and slid it across the island. I looked at him. He was handsome, in a quiet, unassuming way. But he looked soft. He looked like he belonged in a commercial for detergent, not in the boardroom. What did you do today, David? I asked, taking a sip of wine. Did you leave the house? I did, he said. I went to the market to get the fresh herbs. And I had a call with my lawyers. Lawyers? I scoffed. What for? Is someone suing you for aggressive gardening? David paused. He put the wooden spoon down and wiped his hands on a towel. No, he said calmly. Just checking on the timeline. My non-compete expires in 6 months. The non-compete. That damn clause. He had been talking about this for 5 years. He claimed that when he sold Nexus, the buyers, some massive conglomerate, had forced him to sign a strict 5-year ban. He couldn't start a company. He couldn't consult for competitors. He couldn't even code publicly. 6 months, I repeated. And then what, David? What happens in 6 months? Then I go back to work, he said. There was a strange glint in his eye. A sharpness I hadn't seen in a long time. I have ideas, Elena. Big ones. I've been writing the architecture in my head for years. I've been filling notebooks. In your head, I mocked. Right. Because you haven't been doing it in the real world. I can't do it in the real world, he reminded me gently. If I write a single line of code before the date, they can sue me for breach of contract. I have to wait. It sounds like an excuse, I snapped. It sounds like you're hiding, David. You're scared to get back in the ring. You're comfortable here, playing house, cooking risotto, waiting for, what? A miracle? David looked at me. He didn't get angry. He never got angry. I'm not hiding, Elena, he said softly. I'm recharging. And I'm taking care of you. I thought that was enough. It's not enough. I shouted. The outburst surprised even me. I need a partner, David. I need someone who challenges me. I need someone who wants to own the city, not just live in it. I'm tired of coming home to a housewife. David looked down at the risotto. He turned the burner off. I see, he whispered. I'm going out, I said. Mark invited me to a strategy dinner. Don't wait up. I grabbed my keys and walked out. I left him standing in his perfect kitchen, with his perfect dinner, all alone. The affair with Mark started 2 weeks later. It wasn't subtle. We went to a hotel after a client dinner. Mark was everything David wasn't. He was aggressive. He was loud. He took what he wanted. He told me I was a goddess. He told me I deserved a king. Leave him, Mark whispered to me in the dark. He's holding you back. He's dead weight. Imagine what we could do together. The power couple of the year. I believed him. I went home the next morning to end it. David was in the living room. He was polishing the silverware. He looked up when I walked in. He saw the disheveled hair. He saw the guilt on my face. He knew. We need to talk, I said. Okay, he said. He set the polishing cloth down. I want a divorce, I said. I braced myself for the explosion. I braced myself for him to scream, to cry, to throw the silver at me. But he just sat there. Are you sure, Elena? He asked. I'm sure, I said. I've met someone else. Someone who matches my ambition. David nodded slowly. Mark, he guessed. How did you know? You talk about him a lot, David said dryly. And you stopped eating my lunches the day you mentioned him. He stood up. If that's what you want, Elena, I won't fight you. I want out, I said. I want a clean break. Okay, he said. The prenup stands, then. The prenup. I remembered signing it 4 years ago. It was a thick document. David had insisted on it. At the time, I thought he was just being protective of the house. The terms were simple. What was his before the marriage remained his. What was mine remained mine. No alimony. No division of assets. Fine, I said. I don't want your money, David. I have my own career. I don't need a handout from a retired house husband. Okay, he said again. He walked to the desk and pulled out a file. You can take your car. Your clothes. Your jewelry. The house stays with me. I'm leaving today, I said. I'll help you pack, he said. And he did. He actually helped me pack the bags to leave him. He folded my blouses. He wrapped my shoes in dust bags. He was efficient. He was calm. It made me hate him even more. You have no fight in you, I sneered as I dragged my suitcase to the door. That's your problem, David. You just let things happen to you. He looked at me, his hand on the doorknob. I fight for things that matter, Elena, he said quietly. And I don't matter? I asked, stinging. You did, he said. But you clearly don't want to be here. I don't keep people against their will. He opened the door. Take care of yourself, Elle. I walked out. I didn't look back. I drove straight to Mark's apartment in downtown. I felt free. I felt like I had just cut an anchor loose. I moved in with Mark immediately. For the first 2 weeks, it was a fantasy. We drank expensive wine. We ordered sushi every night. We talked about how we were going to run the industry. But then, the dust settled. And I started to notice things. Mark's apartment was in a luxury building, yes. But the inside was a pigsty. There were piles of mail on the floor, mostly final notice bills. There were clothes everywhere. Not folded. Just dropped where he stood. The sink was a science experiment of molding dishes. One night, I came home late. I was exhausted. Babe, Mark yelled from the couch. He was playing FIFA on his PlayStation. He was wearing boxer briefs and a stained undershirt. What's for dinner? He asked without looking up. I stared at him. I don't know, I said. I just got home. Did you cook anything? Mark laughed. A harsh, barking sound. I don't cook, Elena. That's women's work. Or, househusband work. He snickered at his own joke. Just order something. Get me wings. And beer. I pulled out my phone. I opened Uber Eats. I went to check out. Card declined. I frowned. I tried my other card. Card declined. Mark, I said, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. My cards aren't working. I think I maxed them out paying for the movers and the deposit. Can you pay? Mark sighed, pausing the game. Seriously? You're maxed out already? I've been paying for everything lately, I realized aloud. Since I moved in, I paid for the groceries. I paid for the takeout. I paid for the dry cleaning. Mark always had an excuse. Cash flow is tight this week, or waiting on my bonus. Fine, Mark grunted. He tossed his wallet at me. Use the Amex. But keep it under $40. I opened his wallet. It was empty. No cash. Just a stack of colorful credit cards. I pulled out the Amex. Expired. I pulled out the Visa. Maxed out sticker still on the back. I pulled out his debit card. I logged into his bank app on my phone. He had given me the code, in case of emergencies. I looked at the balance. $14.32. I stared at the screen. $14. Mark, I whispered. You have $14. I have assets. Mark yelled from the couch, not looking away from the TV. My wealth is tied up in the market, Elena. You don't understand finance. I understand that we can't buy chicken wings. I shouted back. I looked around the apartment. The expensive furniture was leased. The car was leased. The suits were probably leased. I closed my eyes. I remembered David. I remembered how the bills just vanished. I never even saw an electric bill in 4 years. I remembered how the fridge was always stocked with organic produce. I remembered the foot rubs. The bento boxes. The quiet, steady competence. David wasn't lazy. He was efficient. He handled the business of life so I didn't have to. He was the foundation, and I was just the decoration. Mark wasn't an alpha. He was a child. A broke, loud, useless child playing dress-up in his father's suits. I'm leaving, I said. What? Mark laughed, finally pausing the game. Where are you going to go? You have no money. You spend it all on me. I'll figure it out, I said. But I won't stay here and watch you play video games while we starve. I packed my bags again. I moved into a studio apartment in Queens the next day. It was the size of David's walk-in closet. But it was quiet. And for the first time in months, I wasn't pretending to be rich. I was just poor. 6 months passed. My life was a struggle. I was eating instant ramen. I was taking the subway because I had to sell the car to pay first and last month's rent. I heard nothing from David. I assumed he was still in his house, cooking risotto for one, waiting for his non-compete to expire. Then, it happened. I was at the laundromat on a Saturday morning. I was watching the news on the dusty, cracked TV mounted in the corner. The breaking news ticker flashed red. Tech Titan returns. The 5-year silence is over. I looked up. And there he was. David. But it wasn't the David in the apron. It wasn't the man in the sweatpants. He was standing on a stage in Silicon Valley. The backdrop was massive. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was styled. He looked dangerous. He looked powerful. The news anchor's voice cut through the noise of the washing machines. After a strictly enforced 5-year non-compete clause following the secret sale of his first company, Nexus, for a record-breaking $600 million, David Thorne has re-emerged. I dropped my laundry basket. 600 million? I whispered. I grabbed the edge of the folding table to steady myself. The room spun. I thought he had 10 million. I thought he was comfortable. He had $600 million sitting in the bank while he was color-coding my socks. He had more money than God while I was lecturing him about ambition over a risotto he cooked from scratch. The anchor continued. Thorne is launching his new venture today, Apex AI. The company has already secured a valuation of $2 billion. But the biggest surprise of the day is his partner. The camera panned out. A woman walked onto the stage. She was breathtaking. It was Julianne Vane. She is 28 years old, a world-famous supermodel and philanthropist. She has long dark hair, a smile that lights up the room, and she was wearing a red dress that looked like it was made of liquid fire. She walked over to David. She didn't just stand next to him. She took his hand. She looked at him with total, absolute adoration. She looked at him like he was the sun and she was just a planet orbiting him. And David? He looked at her like she was the only person in the room. He leaned into the microphone. I took 5 years off, David said, his voice deep and confident, booming through the laundromat speakers. I took 5 years to rest. To handle the small things. To serve. He paused, and the camera zoomed in on his face. But I learned that you can't serve someone who doesn't respect the service. You can't give the world to someone who only wants a piece of it. I felt like he punched me in the chest. I felt the air leave my lungs. Now, David said, squeezing Julianne's hand. I'm ready to build the future. With a partner who knows what I'm worth. The crowd erupted in cheers. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. David smiled. It was the smile of a king who had reclaimed his throne. I stood there in the laundromat. The smell of cheap detergent filled my nose. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I looked down at my wrinkled shirts that I had to fold myself. He had done everything for me. He was a billionaire who decided to play househusband because he loved me. He wanted to give me a life of ease. He was waiting for the clock to run out so we could rule the world together. But I was too busy complaining about the bento box. I was too busy chasing a fake alpha to realize I was sleeping next to a real one. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I had traded a diamond for a rock. And now, sitting on the dirty tile floor of a laundromat in Queens, I realized the most painful truth of all. I was exactly where I belonged. #failed to realize.